Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 163rd episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Today we're going to talk about our minds and happiness and how understanding how our minds work can actually elevate our everyday experience to create a life of true contentment, something we talked about last week in episode 162. But before I get to that, this week's Petite plaisir is something that will help heighten that level of happiness, thus your contentment in your life. And it is so simple. 2 things, probably less than $10. And you're going to want to nosh on this. And it's just delicious. It's absolutely delicious. Anyway, we'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. But now I want to get into today's topic. We're going to learn how to truly savor everyday moments, and then we're going to watch as it elevates our everyday life. It's a simple concept, but as I'm going to talk about where my idea came from this particular book I read, it's something we have to do consciously, and it is going to take some focus. But the good news is we have to focus on things that are good, that are lovely, we want to savor. All right, I want to begin with a quote from the author of the book that inspired today's episode. Dr. Rick Hanson states from his book, Hardwiring Happiness, growing your inner strengths through taking in the good is like deepening the keel of a sailboat so that it's less jostled by the worldly winds. It recovers more quickly from big storms, and you can now safely head out into deeper waters in pursuit of your dreams. Now, the founding premise of the book Hardwiring Happiness is change your brain, change your life for the better. Having discussed this fact before on a previous episode, it may not appear to be profound that, yeah, of course, if I change my brain, my life will change. We get that. We get the basics there. But what keeps me reading with regards to books and the brain and how it can affect our lives is I want to more fully and completely understand how we change our brain to change our lives for the better. How does it actually work neurologically? And the how is exactly what made the most sense to me above any other book I've read upon reading Hardwiring Happiness. And I'll provide a link to the book on today's show notes. So if you're curious, definitely check it out. Simply put, we need to deeply savor the good that occurs in our lives, the simple as well as the overtly large. And as we do, we begin to build new synapses in our brain, enabling it to expect the good rather than spontaneously always looking for the bad. The skill that we all need to develop, practice multiple times a day, and then use habitually is to simply take in the good. What is meant by this is a 4-step process, which Dr. Hanson outlines in his book, but essentially it is 1, be present in your life. 2, be engaged, pay attention, and thus to recognize and then savor those moments, no matter how small or large, that are good. Here's a quote from the book. By taking just a few extra seconds to stay with a positive experience, you'll help turn a passing mental state into lasting neural structure. The practice brings you into the present moment and teaches you to have more control over your attention. Now, I think it's important to point out at this point is that the brain is an organ, and it's an organ that learns. So it's designed, as Dr. Hanson states in his book, to be changed by our experiences. So it's malleable. We do have control over it. And so to live consciously is to give ourselves an opportunity to elevate the quality of our lives. Did you wake up this morning feeling rested? Did you savor that moment? Maybe for 10 more seconds next time when you wake up and you know you've had a good rest, just take it in and remind yourself how good such a simple thing is. Truly let it be absorbed in your mind. That is an example of what he's talking about, of taking in the good. Something that simple can start the shift and the changing of our brain's pathology. Here's another example. Did you receive a loving gesture from your partner? Slow down and savor it. Ingrain it into your memory to be appreciated even after the moment passes. Here's another one. Did you feel safe in your home last night? Tip your hat to the world you have created and take a deep breath to again welcome even more appreciation of the fact into your being and into your brain, really. An analogy, and he uses an abundance of analogies throughout the book, which I found to be very helpful. Here's one that he uses to describe the 3-step process of rewiring the brain, and he compares it to making a fire. Step 1 lights it up. Step 2 adds fuel to keep it going. And step 3 fills you with its warmth. He also further explains that often this step 2 and step 3 overlap, which makes sense because you can add wood to the fire to keep it going as you are remaining warm. So I'm going to repeat those steps in the actual terms. And if you'll notice, the first letter of each of these creates the acronym HEAL, H-E-A-L. So the first step to rewiring our brains is have a positive experience. And again, I just gave you some examples there, but I'm sure those are probably sparking all sorts of other ideas in you. And you're thinking, oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. There's so many. Every day we have so many good moments we can experience. Number 2 is enrich the experience. And I call this savoring. So slowing down, in other words, those 10 more seconds and savoring it. And 3 is absorb the experience. In other words, commit it to memory. And there is actually a 4th step, which he does talk about, but he does say that it's optional. And it's described as link the positive and negative material so that positive soothes and even replaces the negative. All of this may sound overly simplified, but after reading and coming to understand how the brain works, how it creates paths of memory, and why it has evolved the way it has, Dr. Hansen, who is a neuropsychologist, demonstrates that it is in the daily routines and the daily tracks we allow to run through our mind that create a happier, and I like to use the word contented. You may remember from our episode last week, 162, the difference between the two. Happiness is outside of ourselves. Contentment is something we cultivate within. We begin to create this more contented way of living every single day, no matter what is going on outside of us. Why? Dr. Hansen dives deeply into this, but a basic synopsis is, quote, in a positive circle, feeling better helps you act better, which helps the world treat you better, which helps you feel better. End quote. On the flip side, if we continue to let negative events run through our minds, even well after they're done, and become absorbed by them, and that immediately what I'm thinking of is this overanalysis that we sometimes do, we are making tracks in our mind. We're strengthening the synapses that reinforce the need to be on the lookout for negative and thus be reactive rather than responsive, which is something that I detailed in episode 145 of the podcast, the difference between being responsive and being reactive. In fact, Dr. Hansen points out, due to our ancestral need for survival, which actually impedes our way of life in the 21st century, our brain is designed in such a way that negative stimuli are perceived more rapidly and easily than positive stimuli. Well, there's, now it makes sense, right? In other words, the default setting of the brain is to overestimate threats and underestimate opportunities and underestimate resources, both for coping with threats and for fulfilling opportunities, which is why it requires a conscious effort to rewire the brain to be less fearful and more positive seeking. And if we do nothing, this scenario that I just walked you through, will persist throughout the duration of our lives, blocking us from attaining our full potential. He does walk through very much in detail that why our brain does that, why it takes a negative stimuli more easily. Because if you think about it, if you do take in positive experiences more positively, it only takes one negative experience to end your life in the instance of our ancestors. And so there really wasn't a need to strengthen that ability in the brain. And so our evolution started with the need to survive, not thrive, to survive. But we're in an entirely different place now. And as he also goes into, this ability to easily perceive negative stimuli actually is bad for our health, thus bad for the quality of our life. And thus it just is a downward spiral if we're not aware of it, and we can shift it. That's the good news. Knowledge of how the brain works is power. And I think that's something to just continue to remind ourselves. We can shift this, we can improve upon it, and it's all about understanding the why. Upon reading the book, if further understanding of the most powerful tool in your body is of interest to you, you will appreciate this book, and how he delivers the information is very helpful. Let's talk about the how of savoring the good moments, both enriching them and then absorbing them and committing them to memory. I have 5 ways that I'm going to share with you. Actually, a few more because they're going to be subcategories. But the first one is simply slow down. In order to recognize when a good moment has occurred, we need to slow down. At that time, take 10 more seconds, just 10 more seconds to just fully observe, imprint into your memory what is going well. Number 2, become fully aware of what surrounds you. So what's outside of you. Being present in the now will help you to be fully aware of all that is going on, all that is going well, and even if certain things are not, because you are fully aware, you can put everything into perspective, bring forward the good and ratchet down the not so good so that it doesn't become more inflamed than it needs to be. So that's number 2, become fully aware of what surrounds you. Number 3, strengthen your emotional intelligence. There are many components to being emotionally intelligent, and I went into great detail on what emotional intelligence is and how to develop it in episode 140, and I'll provide a link to that on today's show notes. But the key component to rewiring your brain is to be able to identify your emotions and what you are feeling accurately. And then once you understand what you are feeling, if it's a positive feeling, you can grow that feeling into a mood. So for example, as Dr. Hansen points out, you can grow a feeling of gladness and gratitude into a mood of contentment. Conversely, if you recognize you are feeling sad about something, you can combat that feeling from developing into a mood of depression simply by recognizing what you're feeling, acknowledging it. You're feeling it. That's real. It's honest. You're human. We're not always going to be feeling glad and appreciative. But then when you recognize that feeling, so you're that emotional, intelligent being, you can then ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What triggered it? What's going on? And then you can combat it by shifting your mind and even your environment to a positive scenario so that your mind doesn't become fixated on something that isn't productive or helpful. So that's number 3, strengthen your emotional intelligence. Number 4, instead of wanting, choose to like or appreciate the moment. Often we are fully aware that a moment or an experience is exponentially good. We know it. It's amazing. The dopamine is surging. Our eyes are wide, and we are just enthralled with the moment. We want it to live forever. We want more of it. Keyword want. But by wanting, as Hansen points out, we aren't experiencing what is going on right now fully. We are removing ourselves from the situation and acting in such a way that reveals we unconsciously feel we lack something, thus the want. In fact, our want is killing any growth of more goodness that we would actually want to create. Instead, be present, enjoy what is occurring, appreciate it for what it is without cajoling it to try to make more, and relish what you have the opportunity to be amongst. As I have learned upon bringing more appreciative and secure people into my life, is that when such beautiful moments are happening, I can take that moment with me in my memory, so long as I savor the experience and allow my memory to absorb it fully, and then replay it whenever I need to brighten my future days. Again, more is not better. Simply deepen what you are given by following the 3-step process. 1, have a good experience. 2, enrich it or savor it. And 3, absorb it, commit it to memory. The last way to bring more moments to savor into your life and how to fully savor them and absorb them is to give yourself permission to do so. I recently was listening to Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio podcast, and he was interviewing Nigella Lawson, who stated on the topic of guilty pleasures, quote, "Look, if you feel guilty about pleasure, you don't deserve to have pleasure." Very blunt, very straightforward, but I think it's worth considering. Back in 2013, I wrote a post about the difference between pleasure and joy. And while one is not bad and the other good, knowing where one is each derived is important. However, with regards to rewiring the brain, anytime we observe and experience a pleasure, we can turn that pleasure into joy, which is something entirely within our control. So, for example, I pulled an excerpt from the post with regards to the difference between pleasure and joy. I pulled an excerpt for you, and I'm going to share with you with it. You can look at the entire post if you want. There's a link on today's show notes. But it's a list of how to welcome more joy into your life. And upon doing so, you can make all of these moments opportunities to rewire your brain as you shift to a more contented way of living each and every day. So here are the 8 different ways you can bring more joy into your life. Number 1, look inward. Become at peace with who you are and celebrate your uniqueness. Those are many moments to savor at any time of day, wherever you are. 2, take time to meditate. Or maybe it's prayer for you. Or simply be still and practice being mindful and present. 3, allow external inspiration such as art, nature, music, conversation to stir your inner creativity and act upon those moments of inspiration. Create, dream, and act according to what is being provoked within you. 4, figure out your purpose and/or passion and then go pursue it. 5, be thankful for what you already have rather than what you lack. So again, focusing on liking and appreciating and not focusing on want. That idea of, I want this because I don't have it, I'm lacking something. No. That's actually going to kill the cycle of goodness. Just appreciate, like, be present, and fully take it in. 6, give when you have the resources, time, and energy to do so. Savor the process of creating something for someone else. Savor those moments. And it's really that aspect of enjoying the journey too. Savoring those steps, committing it to memory. Number 7, pursue avenues or dreams that are meaningful and align with your values. Number 8, plan activities that cultivate more moments of joy. Simple meals, gatherings, events that you are curious about. The conclusion of hardwiring happiness that drove the point home for me of choosing to take on the task of hardwiring my brain or changing the hardwiring of my brain. Because initially it will have to be an entirely conscious choice. It's going to take work. Was that the realization that when we shift away from seeking more happiness and running or trying to avoid pain, we come to recognize that we have the ability to be content wherever we are at any given moment. We have the power. We do not have to chase it. We don't have to run from what we perceive as bad moments, because as we begin to live more consciously, as we begin to focus on the good and taking it in fully and committing it to memory, we begin to build a life that snowballs in the best sort of way. The cycle that was mentioned with regards to, it's a cycle. What we do, what we create is what we basically bring back into our lives. It will strengthen itself, and thus we will attract people, moments, and environments that are full of goodness to appreciate, because we are someone who brings and cultivates moments of goodness in our lives and for those around us. So here's a last quote to ponder from the book. Taking in the good is not about chasing after pleasure or chasing away pain. It's about bringing the chase to an end. For today's show notes, check out the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 163. And I've also included a few other posts that you might enjoy as well on this similar topic. But now we have a very simple petit plaisir, that may be a bit redundant, that I think you're going to love, especially for these summer months. I'll be right back. So this week's petit plaisir is the most simple, perfect, delicious summer appetizer. Melons and prosciutto, or cantaloupe and cured ham. It's a beautiful dish. It's just 2 ingredients, and the pairing of flavors is exquisite. I recently had some friends come visit this past weekend, and before we went out to dinner on Saturday night at one of my favorite restaurants in town, I knew we weren't going to be able to make reservations because they didn't take reservations. And so I knew on a Saturday night we'd probably have to be waiting for quite a while for a table. And you know how it is. You go out to dinner and you're already hungry. And then you're put on a list for 20 or 30, maybe an hour at these really great restaurants. And then you become famished. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were, our taste buds were satiated. We could just kind of wander around downtown while we waited for our table to become available. And so I invited them over for appetizers to my house to sit out on the back porch in the summer breeze. And I wanted something simple but light and obviously delicious. So often I gravitate toward bread or crackers, and then I pair the ingredients with those. But I didn't want to do that this time. I was trying to challenge myself. And immediately, as I was at the market, I thought, oh my goodness, cantaloupe and prosciutto. Cannot go wrong with that. So I picked up a Tuscan cantaloupe and some of my favorite prosciutto at the local market. And as you'll see in the picture, you just slice them very finely, take the rinds off the melon, and then just drape the prosciutto on top for a very simple presentation. It is a lovely appetizer. You can also have it as a morning meal as well. But there's an interesting history behind how this came about. So it's an Italian antipasti favorite, and it dates back to the 2nd century. And it was a doctor by the name of Galeno who believed that the combination of these 2 ingredients were the perfect way to incorporate the 4 things he believed the being or the body or the human being needed to feed what he believed the human body was made of, which is warm, cold, dry, and juicy, which corresponds to the 4 elements of the universe: fire, air, earth, and water. And so the melon incorporated the cold and juicy, and the cured ham incorporated the dry and warm, or thus the salty and the cured. So I'll provide a link so you can dive into even more history about it, but that is the basic premise of how these 2 things came to be such a perfect pair for your palate. All right, don't even need a recipe for that one, right? Just go out and get a cantaloupe, get cured ham, and enjoy. You can get the show notes for this entire podcast at thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 162. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each Monday's podcast where I'll recommend a book, a film, or a recipe. Anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. To stay caught up on the most recent podcasts, blog posts, and receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or your morning coffee, just in time to jumpstart the weekend. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée!